Inside the prison walls worldwide are the most dangerous people, men and women who cannot live in harmony with the rest of society. These are people who steal, murder, kidnap, abuse, and any other heinous act under the sun. Some inmates commit such heinous acts that there is no option but to lock them up for a long time. While some convicts spend the rest of their waking days behind bars, others refuse to die in jail and outlive their sentences. These are convicts who outlived the longest sentences. Francis Clifford Smith. Francis Smith's story is not only sad, but one that has so many twists and turns that it'll keep you glued to your seat. Since he is on this list, you already know that Smith found himself on the wrong side of the law. Early on the morning of July 23rd, 1949, two men broke into the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in Greenwich, Connecticut, a stately white building jutting into Long Island Sound. The pair shot and killed a night watchman named Grover Hart, a 68-year-old family man with a wife and an adult daughter. According to police reports, Hart had died in a robbery gone wrong, and this was the first problem with the case, because what was reported missing included an unspecified amount of jewelry, 6 neckties with the club's insignia, some tie clips, and the club manager's hat. As Hart was dying, he told police that one of the men was small and wore a bandana over his face, information that would see a man spend his entire life behind bars. Police knew Smith and immediately suspected him because he had been known to sometimes wear a face covering. The day after the murder, police in New York found the stolen goods in a gray Cadillac, also stolen, and, relying on witnesses, connected the car to Smith and another prolific Connecticut criminal named George Loudon. Loudon took a plea deal implicating Smith and was convicted of murder in the second degree. Smith, whom police found hiding in the woods with a bottle of hair dye, claimed he was innocent. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by electrocution. The evidence was not adding up, as almost all of the major players in the case ended up changing their stories over time. Loudon even refused to testify against Smith at his 1950 trial, claiming he had been beaten into giving his previous statement. In 1951, Edith Springer, one of the witnesses who said she saw Smith and Loudon together in the stolen Cadillac, tearfully recanted. Then, stunningly, an Alabama prisoner named David Blumetti claimed that he, not Smith, had been the second shooter. Last came Leo Carroll, one of the officers who had interrogated Smith when he was apprehended, who appealed to the Board of Pardons hours before Smith was to be executed. Shockingly, Smith had escaped execution 7 times. The 8th time, his head was shaved for the electric chair. A chaplain had come to sit with him the night before, and Smith talked to him about the same thing he always talked about, his claim of innocence. Luckily, at 3 p.m. the next day, the Board of Pardons met to consider a last plea for clemency. 2 hours before Smith's scheduled electrocution, his death sentence was commuted to life in prison. Smith should have been outright exonerated at this point, but he instead spent an additional 66 years in prison thanks to legal technicalities that had nothing to do with his factual innocence. For example, his final appeal was denied after the judge ruled that just because the star witness admitted she lied, that wasn't grounds for a new trial, because Smith couldn't prove the prosecutors knew the witness was lying at the time. While in jail, Smith focused all of his attention on proving his innocence. He even stole legal books from the library and hid them in his cell. He filed appeal after appeal. He wrote out, longhand, a book-length petition for a new trial. However, nothing was forthcoming, and by 1967, he had exhausted all his appeals. So he got a job in prison in the auto repair shop. Not long after, Smith stole a truck and escaped. After a 2-week manhunt, he was recaptured outside of Boston and brought back to prison. As it turns out, he would have been eligible for parole in 3 years, but because of his antics, that chance slipped through his fingers. After 70 years and 31 days, Smith was finally released, but was paroled and moved to a nursing home in July 2020. He became the longest-serving prison inmate in the United States, whose sentence ended in release. Interestingly, Smith has mild dementia and doesn't always recall what he did a day ago, but he remembers his public defenders, members of the jury, who said what and when, details that he can't stop replaying these details for anyone who will listen, a habit he's apparently maintained for 7 decades. Paul Geidel Jr. On July 26, 1911, a teenage boy would make a costly mistake, a mistake that would see him locked up for most of his life. Paul Geidel Jr. was employed at Rector's Restaurant in New York City. He had information that William Jackson, a supposedly rich broker, would be a guest at the Iroquois Hotel on West 44th Street in New York City. A nearly deaf widower, Jackson had enjoyed a long career as manager of a Wall Street brokerage. He was wealthy, but did not live extravagantly, spending most evenings alone with a book or financial ledger. However, Paul supposed that Jackson's flat was stacked with cash. As it turned out, Paul had worked previously as a bellhop at this hotel, but had been fired just a few days earlier. He decided to pay his former employers one last visit, but this time he was armed with a handkerchief and a bottle of chloroform. Paul had what he thought was a foolproof plan to rob the wealthy broker. However, things didn't go as he had planned. That night, he slipped through a basement door and walked up 10 flights to the apartment of 73-year-old William Jackson. Geidel squeezed through an airshaft window into Jackson's bathroom, where he soaked a washcloth with chloroform. Planning to knock his victim out, he went up to his bed and held held the cloth to Mr. Jackson's face. It wasn't as easy as Guidel imagined. The old man put up a fight, he later explained. Guidel cracked him on the head several times and administered 2 more doses of chloroform before the victim succumbed. The teen then stuffed the cloth in the man's mouth. This is where he made the gravest mistake, because Mr. Jackson suffocated as Guidel scurried around searching for a mountain of loot that wasn't there. Paul, now with a murder on his hands, did not make the killing he thought he was going to make. He found $7, a watch, and stick pin that he pawned on Park Row for only $18. He made just enough to buy a new suit. The teen did not understand the magnitude of what he had done. The Iroquois was a prestigious establishment where financial lions in the city would be seen. To make matters worse for the teenager, his victim's next-door neighbor was Charles Whitman, the Manhattan district attorney who was later elected governor, and a murder next door to the DA would not be tolerated. It didn't take long for the authorities to solve the murder, and just a few hours after committing the heinous act, the youth was arrested. Paul had made the amateur error of leaving evidence, the chloroform bottle. The bottle's label led detectives to a pharmacy in Newark, who directed them to the buyer, Josephine Kane, Paul's landlady. According to her, she had shown him a bottle of chloroform she bought at a drugstore to euthanize an old pet dog. Paul had taken an interest in the drug and had asked his landlady, how much chloroform would it take to kill a man? She pointed them to Guidel, and he was arrested just 15 hours after the murder, wearing his new suit. With the DA personally invested in the story, everyone thought that Paul would automatically get sentenced to death. However, the jury, citing the offender's age, surprised everyone by convicting him of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life with a 20-year minimum and was shipped to Sing Sing prison in Ossining. During Paul's 8-year jail in 1919, he had a mental breakdown in prison. He was sent to the lunacy ward at Dannemora, where he spent 7 years before he was declared cured and transferred back to the general prison population. Having been jailed in 1911, he became eligible for parole in 1931, and he expected to be released. However, he was about to get a rude shock. It is rumored that powerful people from the Iroquois Hotel had pulled some strings to keep him locked up. After embarrassing the hotel, and maybe even scaring away its top clients, the powers that be may have decided to make an example out of him, as 40 years later, he was still behind bars. Luckily, in 1974, 60 years after he was first thrown in jail, Paul was granted parole after the press started asking questions. Surprisingly, he didn't want out. At 80 years of age, he didn't see much out there for him. He was finally convinced to accept freedom on May 7, 1980, at age 86, after 68 years and 245 days behind bars. He survived in a Dutchess County nursing home until 1987, when he was 93 years old. John Phillips. In the spring of 1952, on a Friday afternoon, a 4-year-old girl was attacked near a playground. 3 days later, physicians at the hospital for black residents examined the girl and told police there was evidence she had been sexually molested. This atrocious deed was a capital crime in the Jim Crow South, meaning whoever would be caught was going to face the electric chair. Enter John Phillips. Phillips grew up in Durham, North Carolina, which, at the time, was a bustling town of tobacco and textile factories. His mother was raising 7 children in a 1-bedroom frame house on a dirt road just across the railroad tracks from Durham's poshest white neighborhood. Sadly, his father, an alcoholic, was absent from his life. Very little is known about his early life. However, one story about his childhood sticks out. Phillips couldn't swim, but one day he jumped in the pool at his high school and began flailing and shouting. A lifeguard saved him while his schoolmates laughed, thinking he was playing. Phillips seemed to like the attention and formed a dangerous habit. He would go every day and jump in the pool so they would laugh at him. Eventually, he was banned from the pool. This story is significant because he was in high school at the time. The next day, after it was determined that the victim had been abused, Phillips was arrested and admitted to attacking the girl. The 17-year-old boy was evaluated at a mental hospital and found to have the mind of a child aged 7 years and 7 months. In the terminology of the time, Phillips was classified a moron. However, the evaluation also had information that would see Phillips's life turned upside down. The prosecutor read aloud from the mental hospital report, which said that despite Phillips's mental handicap, he apparently knew right from wrong concerning the crime he was charged with. His defense lawyer entered a guilty plea to accessory before the fact to the crime of defilement, which was unusual. An accessory before the fact aids or encourages another to commit a crime but is not present at the scene of the crime. Phillips showed no emotion during his sentencing in the summer of 1952. According to a newspaper account, young Phillips turned his attention to the pitcher of ice water on the judge's bench. He stared at it until deputy sheriffs ordered him to accompany them. His mother, who had sat quietly at his side, called to him, and when he turned, she held out a $1 bill. He took the money money, and neither one of them said anything. He then followed the officers, his plea bargain having saved him from the gas chamber. Phillips was sent to the state penitentiary in Raleigh. During the 1970s, he was transferred back and forth between minimum security units and central prison in Raleigh for medical treatment. During this time, he had lost touch with his relatives long before. His world had shrunk to the prison yard, where inmates and officers were his family. He was first eligible for parole in 1959, but was denied each time, leaving him frustrated. According to reports, he was tired of watching everyone else go home. When the prison system took over a former tuberculosis hospital in McCain in 1983, Phillips was among the first inmates to enter the new camp's geriatric prisoner program. He served there until August 1989, when he was transferred to the Durham prison. In 1991, the Durham newspaper wrote about his status as the state's longest-serving inmate. The chief of staff for the Parole Commission cited the defilement conviction as one reason for his continued incarceration. Another reason was that Phillips's intellectual disability required a plan on where and how to live upon release, a plan the Parole Commission admitted never having explored. Although Phillips has submitted several lists to prison officials naming people he would let visit him, there is no record of anyone other than a reporter coming to see him during any of his time at the Durham camp. However, after Phillips's story appeared in the dailies, a young girl reading the newspaper was struck how the man named Phillips resembled her grandmother, who had the same name. The grandmother took the paper and was shocked to see that her brother was alive. The family had long thought that Phillips had been killed in prison or died. On the other hand, Phillips believed they had abandoned him. With knowledge of his existence, the family began visiting, bringing gifts and depositing money in his commissary account. After the article, top prison officials came to the Durham prison as they feared a lawsuit and wanted to release him. At first, Phillips refused to get out of jail. However, he was finally released on March 9, 2021, on parole after serving 68 years and 236 days in the slammer. His parole ends on March 8, 2026. Though he pleaded guilty, he has since maintained his innocence. The loss of medical and court records makes it virtually impossible to test that claim, but studies of DNA exonerations revealed that intellectually disabled defendants are especially likely to make false confessions. Joseph Ligon. Joseph Ligon was born on May 3, 1938 in Philadelphia. However, his early life was far from easy. He grew up on a farm in Alabama, facing numerous challenges and hardships. Ligon's education was cut short when he dropped out of school in 3rd or 4th grade, unable to read or write. At the age of 13, he moved back to Philadelphia with his family, hoping for a better life. But fate had something else in store for young Joseph Ligon. On February 20, 1953, his life took a dark turn. That day, fueled by alcohol, Ligon found himself caught up in a violent spree alongside 4 other teenagers. The consequences would be devastating. Ligon and his companions embarked on a series of robberies and assaults that would forever change their lives and the lives of others. Tragically, their actions resulted in the deaths of 2 individuals, Charles Pitts and Jackson Ham. The city of Philadelphia was left in shock and mourning. Soon after the violent spree, Ligon's life took another unexpected twist. He was arrested and charged with the murders. At just 15 years old, he found himself thrust into the criminal justice system, facing a trial that would determine his fate. During the trial, Ligon claimed that he was not given the opportunity for legal representation or family visitation. He alleged that the police coerced him into signing confessions, despite his insistence on innocence. Despite these claims, Ligon and his co-defendants were swiftly convicted of first-degree murder. The court's decision was harsh and unforgiving. Ligon and his companions were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their youth and potential for rehabilitation were disregarded, leaving them with no hope for a second chance. As the years turned into decades, Ligon's case garnered attention and raised questions about the fairness of his sentence. In the early 1970s, he and his accomplices were offered clemency, a chance to have their sentences reduced. However, Ligon refused the offer, maintaining his innocence and his belief that his sentence was unjust. It wasn't until 2012 that a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that life sentences without the possibility of parole for juveniles were unconstitutional. This landmark decision breathed new life into Ligon's fight for justice. In 2017, Ligon was resentenced to 35 years in jail, making him eligible for parole due to the time he had already served. However, Ligon refused to apply for parole, steadfast in his belief that his sentence had always been unconstitutional. His case made its way to the federal court, where his argument was finally vindicated. In February 2021, after spending an astonishing 68 years behind bars, Joseph Ligon was released from State Correctional Institution, Phoenix. His release marked a historic moment as he became America's longest-serving juvenile juvenile lifer, finally tasted freedom once again. But what awaited him beyond the prison walls? As Ligon stepped into the outside world, he was greeted by a wave of emotions. Philadelphia, the city he once knew, had transformed in unimaginable ways. Tall buildings now dominated the skyline, a stark contrast to the city he left behind in 1953. Ligon couldn't help but feel a mix of astonishment and nostalgia as he took in the sights. But amidst the changes, Ligon faced the harsh reality that many of the people he once knew had passed away. The friends and family he left behind had moved on, leaving him with a sense of loss and longing. However, he found solace in the fact that he still had connections with his niece and great-niece, who welcomed him with open arms. Ligon's journey didn't end with his release. He quickly realized that re-entering society after nearly 7 decades in prison would come with its own set of challenges. Fortunately, he found support from organizations like the Youth Sentencing and Re-Entry Project YSRP in Philadelphia. The YSRP played a crucial role in helping Ligon navigate the complexities of life outside prison. They provided him with guidance, resources, and a network of support. Ligon was grateful for their assistance as he adjusted to a world that had evolved in ways he could never have imagined. One of the most significant changes Ligon encountered was the advancement of technology. In 1953, smartphones, social media, and the internet were unimaginable. Now, he had to learn how to navigate a digital landscape that had become an integral part of everyday life. It was a daunting task, but Ligon approached it with curiosity and determination. Beyond the technological challenges, Ligon faced the task of rebuilding his life. He had missed out on the milestones and opportunities that most people take for granted, but he was determined to make the most of his second chance. Ligon sought to reconnect with a community of former juvenile lifers who understood the unique struggles he faced. These connections provided Ligon with a sense of belonging and understanding. They shared stories, offered support, and helped him navigate the complexities of life after prison. Together, they formed a bond that transcended the years spent behind bars. Ligon's release also sparked a national conversation about the flaws in the criminal justice system. His case shed light on the issue of juvenile sentencing and the need for reform. Ligon became a symbol of resilience and hope, inspiring others to fight for justice and second chances. As Ligon settled into his new life, he embraced the opportunity to live on his own terms. He cherished the simple pleasures that were denied to him for so long, like enjoying a meal at a restaurant or taking a walk in the park. Every moment was a reminder of the freedom he had longed for. But Ligon's journey was not without its challenges. The scars of his past remained, and he had to confront the trauma and pain that had shaped his life. However, he refused to let his past define him. Ligon was determined to create a better future for himself and others. Howard Unruh. Before the name Howard Unruh became synonymous with tragedy and terror, his life was marked by a troubled childhood and the harrowing experiences of war. Join us as we delve into the early years of this enigmatic figure, seeking to understand the factors that would eventually lead to his infamous walk of death. Howard Barton Unruh was born on January 21, 1921, in East Camden, New Jersey. Raised by his mother Frida after his parents' separation, Howard's early years seemed unremarkable. However, beneath the surface, there were signs of a troubled soul. Howard was a pious young boy, finding solace in the pages of the Bible and regularly attending services at St. Paul's Evangelical Lutheran Church. He was shy and introverted, often keeping to himself and immersing himself in his two favorite hobbies, stamp collecting and building model trains. As he grew older, Howard's ambitions turned towards working for the government. His fellow students at Woodrow Wilson High School affectionately called him How, and his yearbook noted his aspiration to serve his country in a governmental role. However, the path to a promising future took an unexpected turn when Howard enlisted in the United States Army in 1942 during the height of World War II. Serving as an armor crewman in the 342nd Armored Field Artillery, Howard found himself thrust into the chaos and brutality of war. He participated in the relief of Bastogne during the infamous Battle of the Bulge, occasionally serving as a tank gunner and earning commendations for his dedication and following orders. But the horrors of war took their toll on Howard's psyche. He kept meticulous notes of every German he killed, a chilling testament to the toll that combat had on his mental state. Despite his commendable service, Howard's return to civilian life was far from smooth. His younger brother Jim would later reveal that Howard never acted like his old self after the war, yet there was no official record of mental illness, and he was honorably discharged. Back in Camden, Howard's apartment became a shrine to his war experiences. Walls adorned with pistols and bayonets, and his prized Nazi Luger, a haunting souvenir from his time overseas, took center stage. It was during this time that Howard's behavior began to change. Moody, nervous, and detached, he became increasingly isolated from society. His troubled past and the weight of his wartime experiences seemed to cast a dark shadow over his psyche. Little did anyone know that these early signs of distress would eventually culminate in a day of unimaginable horror. Unruh's descent into madness was fueled by a series of petty squabbles, perceived slights, and name-calling from his neighbors. In his mind, everyday occurrences became acts of aggression that demanded retribution. Unruh's paranoia extended beyond his immediate neighbors. He believed that people in the community were talking about him, spreading rumors about his sexuality. He felt that Mr. Cohen had called him a queer, and that the tailor had spread a story about him engaging in illicit activities in an alley. Unruh's persecution complex intensified as he became increasingly convinced that local teenagers who frequently harassed him had seen him at the family theater, where he had gone in search of companionship. It was this toxic mix of personal feuds, perceived discrimination, and a deep-seated anger that fueled Unruh's desire for revenge. He believed that the world was out to get him, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. Armed with his German Luger P08, a 9mm pistol, Unruh prepared for his walk of death. He secured his weapon with 2 clips and 33 loose cartridges, ready to unleash his fury upon his unsuspecting neighbors. In the early morning hours of Tuesday, September 6, 1949, Unruh embarked on his deadly rampage, methodically shooting and killing 13 people and wounding 3 others in a mere 20 minutes. The streets of Camden were forever scarred by the bloodshed that unfolded that day. Unruh's walk of death would go down in history as one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. Unruh's killing spree came to an end when he engaged in a dangerous firefight with the police. Eventually, he was apprehended and taken into custody, but the true extent of his disturbed mind was yet to be fully revealed. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Unruh was deemed criminally insane, making him immune to criminal prosecution. He was confined to the New Jersey Hospital for the Insane, where he would spend the next 60 years of his life. He died on October 19, 2009, at the age of 88. Bill Wallace. In the late 19th century, in the small town of Young, New South Wales, a man named Bill Wallace was born into a world that would soon be captivated by his shocking story. Born in August 1881 to Alexander and Walterina Wallace, Bill's life took a dark turn in 1926 when he found himself at the center of a chilling crime. Fast forward to 1926, in the bustling city of Melbourne, Bill Wallace, now in his mid-40s, was living a seemingly ordinary life. But little did anyone know, a fateful encounter at the Waterloo Cafe in King Street would change everything. It was a typical day at the cafe, with customers enjoying their meals, and the air filled with the smoke of cigarettes. Smoking was a common habit back then, but for Bill Wallace, it was a source of irritation. Bill, known for his disdain of smoking, approached a man named William Ernest Williams, who was casually lighting up a cigarette at his table. Words were exchanged, and tensions rose as Bill demanded that Williams put out his cigarette. But when Williams refused, little did he know that his decision would seal his fate. Bill, consumed by anger, waited outside the cafe, biding his time until Williams would emerge, and when he did, tragedy struck. In a moment of rage, Bill Wallace pulled the trigger, ending William Ernest Williams' life. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the streets, catching the attention of a nearby police officer. The officer rushed to the scene and swiftly apprehended Bill Wallace, who offered no resistance. The crime had been committed, but the motive remained a mystery. The news of the shocking murder spread like wildfire, captivating the public's attention. While witnesses in the cafe had seen the argument between Wallace and Williams, no one had witnessed the actual shooting. Bill Wallace, tight-lipped and uncooperative, refused to provide any further information beyond his name and place of birth. 2 separate doctors examined Bill Wallace and declared him insane and unfit to stand trial, and with that, his fate was sealed. Bill Wallace was sentenced to J Ward, the facility for the criminally insane in Ararat, Victoria. It was here that he would spend the majority of his life, becoming one of its most notorious inmates. Bill Wallace, known as the oldest inmate at J Ward, spent his days within the confines of this notorious institution. Despite his advanced age, he was far from a docile presence. Bill, always dressed in a suit purchased annually from a tailor in Ararat, had a reputation for being a gentleman. He spent his time playing chess, a game that he loved and excelled at. However, beneath his calm demeanor, there was a darker side to Bill Wallace. He was known for occasional outbursts of violence, often resulting in injuries to his fellow inmates. One particular incident stands out, even in the midst of J Ward's notorious history. During a routine dinner in the dining hall, an inmate made the mistake of reaching across the table to offer Bill the last slice of bread. In a fit of rage, Bill grabbed a fork and stabbed it into the hand of the unsuspecting inmate. It was a stark reminder that, despite his age, Bill Wallace was fully capable of unleashing violence when provoked. The staff and fellow inmates learned to tread carefully around him, aware of the potential danger that lurked beneath his seemingly calm exterior. But amidst the violence, there was a peculiar aspect to Bill's life at J Ward. He was reported to be one of the heaviest smokers within the facility, often indulging in government-issued tobacco that came in a 50-pound block. It was an ironic contrast, considering his initial confrontation with William Ernest Williams had been over smoking. smoking. Perhaps, in some twisted way, smoking became a comfort to him within the confines of J Ward. As the years went by, Bill Wallace's reputation as a violent inmate persisted, even as he aged. But there was something about J Ward that he had grown accustomed to, something that made him refuse to leave when the opportunity arose. In 1981, on his 100th birthday, the public became aware of the existence of this centenarian inmate. A petition for his release gained momentum, with many arguing for his innocence and advocating for his freedom. However, when the government finally agreed to release him, Bill Wallace refused to leave. And so, Bill Wallace remained within the walls of J Ward, eventually being moved to the geriatric ward of Arradale Lunatic Asylum, J Ward's sister facility, where he spent the last years of his life. On July 17, 1989, just a few weeks shy of his 108th birthday, Bill Wallace passed away, leaving behind a legacy that continues to intrigue and captivate. If you enjoyed this video, click on the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.